Hi, everyone. Welcome to an artist check-in. So this is a series that we're doing during the coronavirus pandemic, and it's a series where we check in with some artists. Today, we're checking in with Melinda Laszczynski, who just happens to be one of the artists in our glass tire auction that we have upcoming. We're going to talk a little bit about everything, but Melinda, welcome. Tell us about you.
Thanks, Brandon. Well, I am an artist living in Houston. I teach at Houston Community College at the Southeast Campus, and I'm also a member at Box 13 Art Space here in the East End. So I'm working at my studio right now during this crisis in my one-bedroom apartment and just working on some work on paper.
And you've shown quite a bit around Texas. You and I have actually known each other for a while. I followed your work for a while. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now during this crisis, but also what you were doing before that. Like, what have you been working on? I know you've kind of taken a few new directions a little bit. You started ceramics, grand scheme, not too long ago.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, I was teaching in Paris, Texas, and I started making ceramics there. So the piece in the auction was actually made in Paris, Texas. It was sort of towards the end, so I had figured out what I wanted to make, and it was one of the last pieces I made there. And the last show that I had before everything kind of shut down was at UT Arlington, and it's a three-person show about artists making work in clay and then other materials. So yeah, I like painting and ceramics, and what I've been mostly doing at home since I don't have clay or kiln, anything like that, is just working on painting watercolors and trying to teach online.
Yeah, that's almost a whole other conversation of what it's like to try and teach online right now. When I remember when you kind of started making these ceramic things, it was maybe around the time that, not that you're a member of the trend people, but ceramics have kind of become trendy, or they've become trendy again. People who've been working in ceramics say that they've kind of seen this come and go a number of times. But tell me a little about the process that you're using, because some of these objects almost seem functional at first, but then they're very clearly not. They're kind of goopy and succulent. You almost want to, like, you really want to feel them and touch on them and kind of love on them. The piece that's in the auction, which I think is called Smash, is a little different than kind of almost vaguely vessel-like objects that you've been making. But tell me kind of like about how you started approaching ceramics during this time.
Yeah, so I mean, I made ceramics in undergrad too. So I mean, which was a long time ago. I didn't just like hop on the clay trend, but I really like tactile things, and especially in my paintings, they're very kind of juicy, and I mean, I want to touch them. I think other people do too. Maybe they're kind of like cakey. So to me, clay just is a natural kind of translation of that material. So the piece in the auction, Smash, is made by hand building different textures and pieces, slabs together. So sort of thinking about it like collage and pressing different materials into the clay. It's made of porcelain, so if you're not familiar with porcelain, it gets kind of slumpy and goopy, even more so than like groggy clay. So and it's a little bit bigger, so it does kind of have this smashed cake effect. So that's where the title came from.
Mm-hmm. So if you're not able to do ceramics at home, what exactly are you, I know that's sad. What exactly, I mean, how are you spending your days and approaching this? Also, we don't have to dig all the way into this, but teaching online in a time, or trying to teach art online, how's that going?
Yeah, I guess we can start there. So, I mean, I teach painting and drawing. And I guess, I really love teaching face to face and introducing my students to new material, because that's what I really liked as an undergrad, especially when you're like, I don't know what I want to work with or what I want to paint, and just like trying all the things. I always encourage my students to take sculpture classes and ceramics too. So the way that I'm approaching it is very open to whatever materials they have at home, and I'm just trying to make some demo videos and let them roll with it, and make whatever they can, which I think is how a lot of artists respond to things anyway. Like, oh, I don't have access to a kiln. Well, I can maybe make sculptures out of found objects in assemblage or something like that. So what I'm doing right now is making a lot of work on paper. I ordered some 300-pound watercolor paper, so it's real thick and take a lot of paint. So that's what I'm working on,
That's
making watercolor.
I've seen that you've been posting a lot of like plant watercolors and stuff also. I know you have a really green thumb, so it's kind of like
Yeah,
around the house, almost observational as much as anything else.
I have a lot of time to look at my plants right now.
There
And
could be
see how they're
worse
doing.
there could be worse things to be surrounded by.
Yeah, I mean, like we have a very tiny apartment. So I share it with my partner who's also an artist. So we're both trying to like teach and make work and, you know, coexist in this space with two pets. So yeah, at least we have a lot of greenery. And those paintings, they're definitely more representational and a slow process. So they're real good for painting when you have a lot of time.
So at this point, is making those paintings and is making stuff, is it a de-stressor at this point? I mean, we're recording this at the beginning of April, so when you've been kind of holed up in your house for 2.5 or 3 weeks, you know, there's only kind of so much you can do. Is art the de-stressor, or are you de-stressing in other ways? Not if you can even say that you're de-stressing.
I mean, I'm just a very stressed out, anxious person in general. So, like, for me to de-stress, I mean, I have a lot of strategies. I finally started exercising again, which is like a big deal for me. You know, I started doing yoga and like that's good. I always bake to de-stress, like stress baking is a thing for me. If people would stop buying flour, that would be cool because I can't find any. So that's annoying. But yeah, just, you know, lots of Netflix and petting cats. And yeah, I don't know that I really think of making art as de-stressing. It's kind of more like almost a survival method at some point, you know?
Hmm. Well,
Not
and
to
you
be too morose.
talk about you mentioned baking, and I've had your cakes and stuff, and um, but that kind of goes into your work also. Like when you and I met, you were in grad school at the University of Houston, and you were making these paintings that were very much inspired by cakes, and you were kind of piping acrylic paint through these cake decorating materials, utensils, whatever you want to call them. And you know, I've seen kind of that come and go in the period that you've been making work, but I feel it's coming back a different way in the ceramic pieces, just because you're having to navigate like a new medium. You've been doing painting for a while, but kind of picking ceramics back up with all of the history that you've been working on, I kind of see the surface and cake and cookie decorating coming in through a different lens.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I really like about ceramics is that in painting, I feel kind of like the panel or the canvas is it's inhibiting. I like that clay, you know, I can just kind of form it so it is more like a cake or baking where you're really, you know, using your hands and building it up, and it's really about texture and surface for me. So I think about also the glaze application in a similar way, like not using those tools necessarily, but kind of thinking about that process comes into it a lot. Definitely less literal, but still very tactile. And I will kind of make different types of slips so they could be dyed with mason stain or just kind of different levels of goopiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like frosting and applying those just by hand. But yeah, they're very, very much like made with hands, not pastry tools.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to wrap up, but I have to ask before we do. Well, I already asked if art or what you do to de-stress, but what's your thing right now? I feel like right now everyone's getting like super deep into something because like we all just have a bunch of time, and the time that we would spend going out doesn't exist anymore, or it exists only for us. Or what's your thing? Do you have a thing that you're getting into, or a genre of things, or how are you staying sane basically?
So right before this happened, or as it was starting to kind of unfold, somebody recommended the book Station 11 by Emily, I think her name is Emily Mandel St. James, that's probably incorrect. Anyway, it's a book about a flu pandemic,
Hmm.
which sounds like the wrong thing to read right now, but I actually find it very comforting in a weird way. And then I just ordered some of her other books to read, so that's kind of like my jam right now. I tend to go through authors pretty deep, so I think this is the next big thing for me.
That's good. That's good. Well, it's good to hear. I'm glad you're dealing and I'm glad you're coping. And thank you for taking time to talk with us, Melinda Laszczynski.
Thank you for talking to me, Bern and Zech. Hope that you're de-stressing too.
We're trying.